These are in listen-only mode.
Hello, welcome to the NYAIL presentation on person-centered planning. This is Suzanne DeBeaumont from the Transition Center, and we have a number of people joining us from the Open Doors program, and I see also a number of guests, so that's wonderful. We love when we have additional people signed on. And I just want to go through a few housekeeping items. This is meant to be an interactive presentation. Steve Holmes is from the Self-Advocacy Association of New York State, and he is extremely knowledgeable and loves to take questions. So if you have a question or a comment or would like to be able to speak at any point, you can use the raise your hand feature. And when you raise your hand, it shows up on my screen, and then I'll be able to unmute you. And then you should be able to speak. That won't work if you're using a computer that does not have a microphone feature. So if you have a computer with no microphone feature and you'd like to be able to ask questions, you should use the phone number that's available on your screen with the audio pin. And then again, I'll be able to unmute you on the phone. So again, this is and in addition to if you're not comfortable speaking in the front of the group and instead you would like to type in your questions, you should also have a question box, and you can just type your questions and then I'll read them out. But again, Steve is really interested in having people be interactive and ask questions as we go along. So this is, as I said, a presentation on person-centered planning. Steve Holmes is our presenter. He is the executive director of the Self-Advocacy Association of New York State. And he has done several presentations for us. Steve, are you unmuted now? We're having a little technical difficulties. He sent me an email. We tested everything and everything was fine. And he is sending me emails saying that he's muted.
Oh, there I am.
There you are. Okay, great.
I just saw your sign. There we go.
So I'm very glad that he is now unmuted.
I have no idea what was wrong, but there we are.
Okay, good. So without further ado, Steve, I'll turn this over to you. And I did tell everyone, please ask questions because that's what's going to make this more informative for everyone.
Okay, just one quick question. I didn't ask you this before. How do I advance a slide? Just
let me know and I'll advance them for you.
Okay, great. All right. So I just wanted to introduce myself a little bit for people who may not know me, but I thought I'd also just give a little bit of a history of my career, which actually overlaps a lot of what caused some of the problems that we have here in New York. Not that I caused them, but I was here during a lot of the things that led to the development of some of the 12-person houses in our state, which is a big part of the home and community-based settings issues that we have. So I started actually working in the field in 1969. I was a conscientious objector from the war in Vietnam. I was in the Navy. I got out of the Navy, and I had to do some civilian service, and I ended up at this place called Fernald State School in Massachusetts. And I went in one day, and I had no orientation. I was introduced to a guy I was working with, and he introduced me to 28 men that we were going to work with that day. And my job was to feed 14 people, to clean those folks on a slab that was in this bathroom that was incredibly, that as a 19-year-old, I couldn't believe that people had to have this experience and then wash the floor and then do that again during the day. And it was a horrible place for people to live, and it wasn't a great place to work. There was some violence going on in that institution towards people, but I made it clear, though, even though as a conscientious objector, if I saw anybody hurt somebody, I would hurt them. It didn't make me popular, but it was a challenging place to work, and I loved that job. It was my first time I had met with people with disabilities. I got to know anybody with a disability. Not one person in that place I worked spoke to me. They were all profoundly disabled. Nobody had any verbal abilities. Everybody spent their entire day in a crib with diapers on all day long. That's all they ever did. There was no clothes provided. It was warm during the summer, warm during the winter, and it was not a very great place to work, and yet I felt connected with those men, and I went from being somebody who thought I was going to be a peace activist for the rest of my life to somebody who has stayed in this field since that time. I worked in group homes in Massachusetts. I ran an apartment program and became an executive director of an agency. Massachusetts did not do large homes. They did a lot of smaller homes. I moved to New York in '84 got an executive director job up in the northern part of the state, and I ran a program for 10 years up there, and part of my job then was to help move people out of New York City, and our board wanted to participate in that. We built 3 houses that were ICFs then, 2 12-person homes and a 10-person home. I didn't want to do that. I wished I hadn't do that. I mea culpa every time I say that, because those places are part of the problems that we have in our field now. But we did move people out of some of the worst places imaginable, much like the places I described in the beginning of this conversation. We moved people from the Bronx Developmental Center, that in the 80s was one of the worst places imaginable, and at that time, during that period of time, Arthur Webb was a commissioner of OPWDD. There was a big push because of the post-Willowbrook era to close institutions. And I don't know if people know this, but at one point, OPWDD had 22 institutions. They had one in every DDSO. There was 22 DDSOs at the time. And over 27,000 people, I think, lived in those institutions at one point. And so a lot of the closure. New York City had 5 of them. Willowbrook was only 1. There were 5. Long Island had 1, and there was virtually 1 in every part of our state. And so we began a massive closure. The closures that are occurring now are finishing that process, but a lot of it happened in the 80s and early 90s. And I believe that the 18,500 people that are still living in places with more than 8 people are people who moved in. Many of those people are people who moved into those 12-person houses during that era, and it's something that is now, so that's sort of, I'm not taking the state off the hook for the problems that we have, but that's part of the explanation of why we have so many people. What we did not do as a state, I can say this, is that in the 90s, when the waiver came in 1989. New York entered the waiver in '91, which is we were sort of 2 years late, and I think we were I'm pretty sure I know this, but we were the 49th state to get involved with the waiver. And within a couple of years, because we converted many of the ICFs to IRAs, and I hope people understand these terms. If you don't, I can explain that. But the IRAs were the home and community-based settings that were Medicaid funded at that point, and through the waiver. To this day, there are still many of those places, most of those places still exist. And I think it's a big part of our challenge going forward. For the last 23 years, I've had just an incredible opportunity to work directly for the self-advocates. I'm not the executive director. Our board functions in that role at the executive committee, and I work closely with them as the administrative director. I've had this job for 23 years, and as some people know, maybe some on the call don't know, or if you know me, I'm actually leaving the job at the end of this year, and going to be going on to doing some new things. I'm not sure what they're going to do. The first thing I'm doing is going to take a break, and so that's basically a little bit about me. And let's start the presentation. That was helpful. So our organization is a nonprofit organization run by and for people with developmental disabilities. Our board is made up of board members with developmental disabilities, and we have an executive committee that meets probably 10 times a year, 3 or 4 times a year in Albany. Our board meets 4 times a year for 3 days, and we have phone calls in between. So we have a lot of contact with leadership, and we are advocating. And the biggest part of our advocacy is trying to change OPWDD's system. And we've had some success, and we still have a lot of work to do. So next slide. So here, I'm just going to give a few slides leading up to the conversation about that settings rule. One of the things that self-advocates believe is that not being able to speak is not the same as not having anything to say. And one of the reasons why I chose this slide is that what people may not know just how many people who live at homes run by OPWDD and provider organizations, including ones that I was personally involved with when I was a director. There are many, many people who do not speak for themselves, cannot express preference, which does not mean to say that they don't have preferences or that they don't have something to say. They're just, at this point, we haven't found a way to communicate with some of those folks. And I think that a presentation I'm doing in my coming as I leave SANYS is about HaHa and Soul, and it's going to be looking at how we listen to people who are profoundly disabled and still respect them as a person on a journey like us here in this earth. So that's what I'll say about that for now. So SANYS built our initial work around person-centered planning in the 90s, late 90s, and all through the first part of the 2002, 3, 4, 5, and 6 as self-direction was coming together by talking about choices, by the choices people have. So people had a right to choose, a right to have choices of where they live, and you can keep moving. You can move the slide. So where people live, what people do during the day. That's what we've been advocating there for a long time. Those choices have been limited for many people, and they're beginning to increase. You can keep going. Move the slide. Yep. They have a right to choose how they get around their community, and we can just keep flipping through some of these. And they have a right to choose what people want to learn about, and to get education. So in terms of when we talk about person-centered planning, I wasn't sure what people's knowledge of person-centered planning was, and I found something on OPWDD's website that I thought was really interesting. So I actually took this next section right from OPWDD's website. So there are actually 6 different types of person-centered planning that are discussed in that website. The probably 2 most common ones and the ones that are used most often are personal futures planning, which is Beth Mount is associated with that for people who know Beth Mount, and if you can move, well, I'll just read what it says here. If you can go back, and person-centered planning aims to generate powerful images of a rich life in the community that will guide a search for opportunities for the person to take up valued social roles and develop service arrangements to support the person in those roles. It collects and organizes information by looking through a set of windows for change, which describe the person's relationships, important places, things that energize him or her, the individual gifts, capacities, ideas, and dreams for a desirable future. And person-centered planning, again, is very common, especially here in New York, where Beth Mount has done a lot of work. Planning Alternative Tomorrows with Hope, PATH, is a less known but often used process for discovering a way that people can move forward to a positive and possible goal, which is rooted in life purpose by enrolling others, building strength, and finding a workable strategy. And we can move to the next one. And then mapping, which is John O'Brien and Jack Pierpoint, and I can't remember the first name of the person, Khan, that's listed there. It's a group process for discovering a way to move towards a positive and possible goal, which is rooted in life purpose. It's similar to the last one, actually. I think I might have cut and pasted wrong on this one. Maps is a way, and that's my fault. I missed that. Maps is a way of using maps and diagrams to chart the things that people are interested in, and then using planning strategies to help them with that process. Essential lifestyle planning is, along with personal future planning, is one of the most common styles and strategies that people use. It was developed by Small, and he's a very a very active person in this field to this day. NYAIL, if you know NYAIL, are doing a lot of training using his work. It asks what is important to and for a person in everyday life. It specifies the support the person requires in person-specific ways to address health issues or safety that balance what is important to the person and what is important for the person. It clearly identifies opportunities for improved assistance, guides continually learning about the person, supports in a way that is easily understood by those who assist the person. And so we can and so those are some at least the top ones. Facilitated discovery is another one that's discussed. This is generally applied to people in developing of jobs with Michael Callahan, who is a pretty knowledgeable developer of jobs, and has done a lot of presentations around the country and the world. It's a systemic process of answering the question, who is this person, that generates a rich background for negotiating a customized employment role. So for those of you who know or have heard the term customized employment, it originated with Mike Callahan. It's a great way of building a job around a person's skills. Here in New York, JobPath in New York City has really perfected that technique and has helped a lot of people to get jobs that are based on that. Willpower actually came from SANYS, and we had not talked about it as a person-centered planning process, but we were excited to see OPWDD chose to put it here as one of their person-centered concepts. And Willpower was a set of PowerPoints that actually led to our We Have Choices movie that some of you may have seen, and it's on our website if you haven't. We called it Steering Your Way Towards a Life of Distinction. It's a group of self-advocates, 5 to 10 people focused, usually focused people with their families and allies, support one another to make wheels that illustrate their current involvement in the valued social roles and the desired vision for a life growing through the expansion of valued roles. We didn't actually use those terms when we were talking about willpower. We basically, and you'll see the wheel in a few minutes, we basically talked about how people could get the life they want, and that in our work at the time, when people were, generally speaking, when people were asked what they want, people would say, where would you want to live and where would you want to work? But Willpower shows that there are just many, many dimensions, and we had 8 dimensions that we used, but there are many, many dimensions of people's life, including community involvement, volunteerism, being involved with groups in the community, and I'll go over those when we get to that chart. And here it is. There's Willpower. So work is important to people. Learning and teaching is taking classes, including community classes. It's about neighborhood and community membership. Being involved. If people wanted to go to the gym, you don't need to go to the gym with a whole group of people with disabilities. You join the gym and be a gym member, and you can participate maybe with the support of one person or another person. But it's not the group home goes to the gym. It's about supporting people to be a member of their community and have some opportunities to meet people. And for the people who have done that in our work, we've seen people develop relationships with people through that. Creative expression is about art and music and the things that people do, that many of us do, including me. I've learned to play the guitar myself and written songs and play songs. Many people with disabilities are doing the same thing, learning to play music or to sing or to be involved with creative expression, but art is also part of that, and that's one other dimension that people have an opportunity for. Family and friends. One of the really important things that we have to consider with person-centered planning is, for many people, who are living in places within our system, they have lost contact with many of their family members. And one of the really cool things that I've seen happen with person-centered planning, especially when people take the time to do this, is to help people reconnect with family members who they may have lost contact with over the years. And we've seen some great examples of people who have gotten reconnected with their family members, and the family members have gotten involved, especially as they've moved out of the large settings that they might have been in. And people, aunts and uncles, brothers and sisters, and it's something. And in fact, there's a whole process for that people use for finding, very much the way you would find your ancestors, connecting with relatives that you've lost. And some organizations have used that to help people discover family members who might want the opportunity to reconnect with their family member who has been living in an institutional setting or a large group home. And we've seen some cool things happen. Home life is about people having their own home or a place where they call home. And I think you'll see that in the home and community-based settings rules, that those things are expressed and affirmed in terms of the rights that people have. But everybody, certainly all of us, want to feel at home when we're at home, and having control of your home, owning your own home, having an apartment in your name, or having a lease, or having that control of who lives with you. If you need people to live with you to afford the rent, which many of us in this world do, that you make decisions about who those folks are. And just to stop for a second and give you an example of how that has not been happening for those of you who are aware how OPWDD, we've had such a enclosure of institutions and trying to get people into group living situations. And every place there's a vacancy, oftentimes we're moving people into homes without going through a process of truly giving the people who live in a home the opportunity to have a say in who they live with. And I think that you'll see also in the community settings rule that that's one of the things that is really affirmed, that people have a right to say not only who they share a room with, but who they share an apartment with. And I think that's one of the things we have a lot to work on in our system, because we have so many people who share a home with a lot of people, and we have a lot of needs. So let me tell you one story here. Ken Berg. Ken is he's a young man, and he's on our We Have Choices PowerPoint that we did years ago, and it's on our website. If it's not, I'm pretty sure it's still on our website. I meant to check that today. Ken was a man who lived in Willowbrook, and when the picture that you see of him is the time he was from the time he lived in Willowbrook, and he spent most of his life in that position that he's in right now. Profoundly, a man who could not verbally express himself, and got obviously very little support and very little individualized attention. Actually got almost no individualized attention except when his family came to visit him. So if we can move the slide and begin to get a little bit to know about Kenny. So once Ken was known as a child who was deaf, blind, and profoundly cognitively and mentally impaired. He was also very self-abusive. His future was not very bright. Next slide. However, he is now a volunteer 30 hours a week at the Adrian's Farm in Queens. Believe it or not, if you don't know this, there's a farm in Queens. It's a historical site right now. And Kenny, one of Kenny's volunteer jobs is he's responsible for gathering, washing, and packing the eggs. Kenny has a support person with him throughout this time, and he does a lot of other jobs at the farm. But Kenny, it turns out, just loves to help chickens, to take eggs from chickens and put them into the different containers, and it's a fun thing for him. And he's got to be really good at it. And he has been at that job now for something like 15 years. It's not a job; it's a volunteer job. And people know him, they love him, they care about him. Just as an aside, one of the rule changes that happened this year in our field, and these are the things that we have to watch for as we begin to see how we support people with developmental disabilities to have the kind of life that they want. Kenny was getting 8 hours of support a day, and now when he was living at his parents' with his mother, it was not a problem. But when he moved into a group home, it was found that Kenny getting 8 hours of support a day, he's living in a group home, he got the equivalent of 18 hours a day during the week and 24 hours a day on the weekend. So the days that he was working, or in his volunteer work, during the week, there was a conflict with 2 hours. And so for a couple of years, an organization paid for that, and now there's been some, we're trying to find a workaround. The system is trying to find a workaround so that Kenny can work 8 hours a day and not have to go home after 6 hours. Kenny likes that job. Kenny wants to stay doing that 8 hours a day, just as he's been doing, and so we're advocating to make that work. So Kenny has defied all the odds, stereotypes, and limitations that were stacked against him, and so can you. Again, we were using this whole process to teach people about choices, and including choices for people who couldn't express those choices. So one of the really underutilized things in our field, and one of the ways that people with developmental disabilities and others can really be supported is with circles of support, and it's something that we're hoping that more and more people will begin to use. It's something we've talked about in the field for a long time. It had originated, as many of the good ideas had originated with John O'Brien and Beth Mount and some of the people from that era in the early 90s and into the early 2000s when all this stuff was really coming together. And as we began to develop self-direction, and SANYS was responsible for the original self-determination funding that OPWDD received, and we finally convinced, by the way, DOB to go with an individualized budget, which was a big task in the year 2002 and 2003, and they didn't do as much of it as they said they would, but they did begin that process. But one of the things that we knew worked well was circles of support. And circles of support include family members, close friends, chosen staff, and other key allies. Some of the people that we've seen be some of the most valuable members to people on people's circles, on a circle of support, are staff members who once worked with people, who developed a relationship with a person, and that relationship continued after they left the organization. And one of the ways it continued for some people was that they were on their circle of support as they moved out of group living situations into apartments and into self-directed opportunities. Using a person-centered planning process, like one of the ones we talked about a little while ago, helps explore the dreams, the goals, the desire of the person through a discovery process. That discovery process is a word that is used to describe how you get to know a person and how you spend time with a person and discovering the things that they're interested in. And I think that one of the things that people don't understand about the person-centered planning processes, and I think when you look at some of the person-centered processes that people are using now, and even when you look at the home and community-based settings rule, it's very devoid of some of the spirit of what is involved with person-centered planning. And the discovery process is one of that. It's a time-consuming thing. It's for people who don't express a lot of preference, especially, it's sitting around with people who know that person, who know what they like, who know what food they like, who know with the people that they seem to like to be around, who know the things that they seem to enjoy, people who can help a person, who can help build a plan around a person's interest. And that was how Kenny ended up getting some of the opportunities he had, because people had seen him in different situations that he seemed to really groove with. He got into it. He enjoyed it. He was excited. And I think that that's part of. It's a missing part of that, of a lot of the concepts of person-centered planning that we throw out now. Person-centered planning is a process. It's an engaged process, and it involves as many people as a person wants to be involved in a life, or we can help them discover who have been in their life in the past or who would be interested in supporting them, in helping them to imagine what they could do in there, what are the things they want to do, and how would they like to do those things. And some of the best living arrangements, some of the best jobs, some of the best volunteer opportunities came out of those very engaged opportunities, especially where people met people through that process who provided some of those opportunity. And those things, the circle and the discovery processes and the things that you find through true person-centered planning really energize the plan, and it helps sustain and provides an ongoing. If it stays together, if the group stays together, it provides that ongoing support to help monitor outcomes and their revisions over time. Person-centered plans don't stay static. A person's life changes, and it changes very rapidly as people begin to get offered new opportunities, and it's something that has to be revisited on an ongoing basis, and it's a really critical thing. I've been on a number of people's circle support, and I've loved that experience, and it's been great to watch people be supported to imagine what they want to do, be supported to get those opportunities, and then be supported to be successful on some of those opportunities, both for work but for getting to know people in their community, which is a very important part of person-centered planning. So we can move on. So one of the ways, and I just want to touch on this chart, all of the things that we're talking about today, none of the things that we're talking about are going to happen just with those of us who are involved with person-centered planning and those of us who are trying to help people in those plans. What we really need to develop is a system of partners for change, for people working together to transform our system. And one of the early versions, and you can see the date on this, is 2006. We had a DDPC grant, by the way. I want to credit DDPC for this, that we used for a tremendous amount of gatherings all over the state in talking about the development of individualized supports, person-centered planning, self-direction, and trying to move that forward in the state. And one of the things we recognized is that we really have to develop a group of partners for change, and the partners that we listed were self-advocates, families, community members, direct support allies, who again can be and are incredible partners, and especially some of the people who have been somebody's support staff and then come back and stay involved in their life. Provider organizations are important, are very, very, very critical partners in this, and the work we've tried to do is to work with providers, especially the providers who are interested in doing new things and different things, and listening to people and beginning to develop some of the things that people want. We had a lot of success in those years getting some organizations to begin to offer self-directed supports, and several organizations get started that offered only self-directed supports. But both of those types of organizations are very important to this process going forward. And OPWDD and other state agencies are critical partners for change. If they don't change the way they think about things, if they don't, with people who have a desire to do new things in their lives, to have control of their budgets, to hire their own staff, to be involved in their community, to be on committees, to be part of the advocacy within the system, things won't change. And we've had some success. We've obviously have some things that we're going to continue to work on, both as an organization in terms of self-advocacy, but all of us together as a field, to keep moving forward in this direction. And then we also added two things that were really critical to this process, and that's that we need passionate leadership. We need people who believe in people, and self-advocates themselves, of course, are the greatest leaders in this process. But so many of us who are not self-advocates or who are not receiving services can be allies and can help provide passionate leadership. Part of what I expect to do as I leave SANYS is to find a way to be involved in some ways in that process. And we need a value-based philosophy. We need to believe in people. We need to believe that people with the right supports can be anybody, any single person in our system with the right supports can be in their community. And in fact, the people with the most profound disabilities, every one of those persons can and should have an opportunity to be out in their community. It's one of the things that the community-based settings rule discussed, but it's one of the biggest challenges when you look at some of the needs that people have. And when we're talking about being out in the community, we are not talking about people being at the mall and 5 people with profound physical disabilities walking down the mall together as a group. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about people, all people with disabilities, being out in the community as individuals where they have an opportunity to meet community members, including people who need lots of support. And that's going to be a challenge. That's something that's expected in the settings rule, and we'll look at that. That's going to be a challenge with the staffing patterns that many organizations have. Have a 12-person house. It's really hard to have spontaneous activities and hard to have one-on-one kinds of opportunities, but we've got to figure out a way to do that. And that's part of that values-based philosophy. So regulating change. So let's take a look at some of the language in the waiver, and we can switch to the next file, because there is regulations now that are moving this direction. So first, though, this is a slide that's not part of that, but this is the hallmarks of person-centered habilitated planning, and I believe I got this off of OPWDD's website. But this is based on a lot of things that have been developed over time. But so some of those hallmarks are person-centered, person-directed, and individualized. It includes activities and interactions that are meaningful to the person, based on his or her needs, interests, preferences, strengths, and capacities. Activities, supports, and services foster skills to achieve meaningful goals. I'm not sure if I like the word meaningful, because it's not so meaningful sometimes, but goals that mean something to the individual, goals that are important to them, things that they are interested in, and outcomes for the person. Personal relationships, those outcomes are personal relationships, which really are critical for people. And you get that through community inclusion, from being out in the community, from getting to know your neighbors, from getting to know people in the businesses in your community, from dignity that you receive from that, and the respect that you can gain from being out in the community. It's really hard for that to happen. A quick story. I had a conversation with some folks. I was talking with some people about how important it is to support people in the community, and this woman was in the audience. She said that, I was out with some people, and we were at the McDonald's the other night, and those people weren't supported at all to be in the community. In fact, everybody in the place got up and left when we went in there. And it just didn't sound right to me, so I said, can you describe what happened a little bit? And she said, well, some of us went into a McDonald's, and we started getting on seats, and we started getting our food, and before you know it, everybody had left. And I said, well, how many people did you have? And she said, well, let's see. And she was counting in her head, and she said, well, we had 15 people. And I said, well, how many people did you have that were using devices? And there were 5 people who were using motorized wheelchairs in that group. So, I mean, here an incredibly large group of people descended on a McDonald's with all of the, the noise and the kind of things that come with that, and they considered that to be a violation of their community, of their being in the community. That is not community inclusion. That is not what, and that's an extreme example of that. But even 2 or 3 people in the community is a lot, unless they're friends and they're choosing to do that on their own. That's what they want to do. That's what they want to do. But as a field, we have done so many of those outings where lots of people are out in the community as a group. That was an extremely large group in a small McDonald's, and I think that's an extreme example. But 5 or 6 people in a mall. It does not foster that type of thing. And what we want to see happen for people, and what people tell us they want, is for whenever possible, be in natural settings and within the broader community. People, if people want to get jobs, they want to work in businesses, and if they're doing volunteer work, they want to do volunteer work in the community, and they want to do volunteer work not with a group of people but as individuals, so that they get opportunities for that might lead them to job opportunities, and the person has those meaningful choices, and they make the informed decisions about the things that they want to do. So here's the first regulation. So let's look at how this begins to energize and really empower this whole idea of person-centered planning. So first of all, for the settings rules say some things like this. The setting is selected by the individual among setting options. So a person has a choice among options, including non-disability specific settings. The setting options are identified and documented in the plan, in the person-centered plan. Many times people call the person-centered plan the ISP. an ISP can be a person-centered plan, but it's not a true person-centered plan unless it really includes some of the elements of the planning process. I've known people who have told me when I've said, "Hey, you coming to the meeting on Tuesday night?" That they had planned on coming. They said, "No, I can't. No, I can't come to the meeting now because I've got a person-centered plan. I've got my ISP scheduled." And so we said, "Well, did you know you had a schedule? Did you choose that?" "Oh, no, it was scheduled for me, but I have to be there because it's my ISP." And so, over the years that's happened less and less, but many times people's ISPs were planned for people. Person-centered planning is not about that. It's about people deciding when they meet, who they meet with, and what they talk about. And it's again, as I talked a bit about at the beginning, it's an engaged process that gets people involved over a period of time in imagining and expressing the kinds of things they want to work on in their lives, in the places they want to be involved with, and then get some opportunities to try those things out. So, through person-centered planning, it's pretty hopeful that people aren't going to be choosing to be with a group of 5 or 6 people doing anything in the community. They're going to be looking for options to do things with a friend or two, or some other people without disabilities perhaps, and certainly in volunteer situations as an individual. So we can move on to the next slide. So choices of a setting where waiver services are delivered. So some of the things that the Hcbs settings rule requires choice of the setting in which the waiver services will be delivered. Now, that's going to be a really tall order for OPWDD over time because many people are living in places where they haven't had that choice. Again, there are 18,500 people living in places with more than 8 people in our state, and again, we can date that back to the closure of institutions, and it's part of the challenge. We can also date it back to our lack of embrace of the waiver in the 90s, and really not a full embracing of self-direction. But much of what we're dealing with is which came from the good intentions of closing institutions. But we have a lot of work to do to begin to satisfy this very important goal, which is having people have choice of where they live. And the choice, and this is a very important part of this, the choice must include a non-disability specific setting. People have rights to live in their own apartment with other people that they want, in communities that they want to be in. They don't, in situations that they can develop, and we have fantastic examples of people who are doing that right now. People who are living there's a great story that OPWDD, I believe, has on their website of some people that are involved with self-advocacy in the Rochester area. 2 ladies are living together. They both have 24-hour support for their physical needs. They both use power chairs. They're living in a house actually with a 3rd person who's in the same situation, and they have individualized people that they hire, the staff that they hire. They do some things together that they choose to do, but they have different jobs and different volunteer opportunities. So there's things that they choose to do together, and they have created a living situation which was much like the living situation I had when I was working at Fernal, and I shared an apartment with 4 people. When I was 19 years old, and not asimilar to the same type of apartment I had when I was 23, 24, 25 before I got married. And I think that I did some things with my roommates, and other things I didn't want to have anything to do with my roommates. And I think you'll see that in that choice that people have when they live with people they choose to live with. But the home and community rules also, can you go back to that one slide so I can finish that one? The home and community settings rule also cover the settings where people live that are provided by providers. So the plan documents have to reflect the choices offered in non-disability specific settings. This means that the habilitation planning process engages the person in decision making on where and how they receive their supports. I don't like that word habilitation, so I don't like to say it much. But then this was written for this primary part of this waiver was written for day services and employment, and the word habilitation is used in that a lot, but it's a word that gets overused in our field. Now we can switch into the next slide. Thanks. So again, here we are with the habilitation again, but the documentation. This is the kind of stuff that CMS is expecting to see. The documentation clearly indicates that the individuals have participated in person-centered planning process. It's not a meeting, it's a process, and made decisions about where and how they receive their supports. We want to make sure that this is a process that's occurring. There's lots of training around person-centered planning, but there's not lots of good person-centered planning that is happening. It must be clear from the documentation that the person's specific interest areas were explored as part of the person-centered process and are part of their proposed activities, and that should lead to increased autonomy and choice and community integration. That's what the goal is. That's what people say they want, community integration, to be part of their community. Clint here in our office uses the term to be of the community and part of the community. And a clear outcome of a person's choices, when appropriate, the choice is made by when appropriate, the choice made by other people is done by people who know the person well, and that must be included in their documentation. So there are many people who may not tell you that they want to move out of a 12-person home, that their family and allies and friends can help articulate that possibility for that person and begin to move in that direction. Again, that choice can be made by persons who know that person well, especially people who are guardians or family members, but also advocates and people who are involved as members of their circle. So moving forward.
So
on
Steve,
slide.
if you
No,
know,
go ahead.
so
Yep.
for Ken, the person that you were describing before, who was, clearly would have a lot of trouble communicating, because of his disability, how would they have involved him in a process? Can you kind of give an example of how he would have been involved?
Well, I think, first of all, the person should always be present, because we can't assume that a person is not understanding what we're saying. Or that at some level, we just don't know. And it's important that people are always involved. We should never be meeting with anybody without them present in these kinds of things. But oftentimes, one of the ways that you know what a person likes is by trying things out with a person. So if people go out into the community, you might know what restaurants they seem to enjoy the most. It's not always possible to understand that with everybody, but usually you can get some ideas of where people like to be. You can get to know which type of movies they like to see, what types of the places they like to be in the community. If people like to go to malls and like all that excitement, a lot of people don't want that. People might like to go out in the country. They might enjoy long car drives and walks in woods, and there's great place for people who use wheelchairs. There's lots of great places now for people that are accessible out in the community that get you out in nature as well. I think that the part of the process is part of that discovery process. Get to know the person by doing stuff with the person, and by including people who know that person and know the things that they seem to enjoy. That's the process. So the Hcbs regulation is another one that we'll talk about. Is the setting optimizes but does not regiment individual initiative, autonomy, and independence in making life choices, including but not limited to daily activities, physical environment, and with whom to interact with. So it's not regimented. It means that people do have choices not to be engaged in things in settings, but it's not. You can't push people and force people to do things. That's not what it's about. But it is about encouraging people, showing people options, and giving people to make independent life choices. And again, it's not limited to daily activities in the physical environment and whom to interact with. There's this whole host of other things that people can decide: what church they go to, what food they, all those kind of things. Who's going to be their roommate? All those things that are in part of the settings. And again, in working with people who don't express a lot of preference, people who know that person, who hang around with that person, who involve that person, and especially some of the staff who know people well and care about people, they get a sense of the things that they enjoy, and they can sometimes give a lot of information in a person-centered planning activity about that person's interests. Moving on. So some values and strategies of person-centered planning, thinking, and processes. So these were some that came from Beth Mount's source book on person-centered planning. It was actually written very early in the 90s and updated right through through 2000. Beth Mount is somebody that Self-advocacy has worked a lot with. We've done a lot of gotten a lot of training and support from her. She helped us with our We Have Choices film We Have Choices PowerPoints, which led to which focused on 24 people and different aspects of their life and using person-centered planning, and then our We Have Choices film, which shows profile 6 people in situations that developed through person-centered planning, where they were very, very much connected and living an alternative and doing alternative things in their community. So here's these are the things that Beth identified, and many of us have talked about in maybe different ways over the years. But the first part of person-centered planning is to really and again, I won't use the word discover, but discover by getting to know the person what their gifts are, what are the things that they bring to this world, and what are the things that they're good at, what are the things that they have to offer. And then, developing a vision and a plan in a way to help that person express those gifts. So if a person's good at certain tasks, making sure they're getting that opportunity in employment. One of the things about customized employment that I like is it comes through a discovery process, and the person might be good at one thing in an employment situation, and then trying to customize a job so that person gets through that. One person I know that JobPath worked with, and I've seen some video of this person. He just really liked to clean stuff up, and he just liked to be involved in making things neat. It was one of the things that he liked to do, and he ended up getting a job working at a store, and they convinced the store to hire him to do this and free up their salespersons. And what he did was he put all the clothes that people tried on, all the belts that went back into pants, all the buttons that needed to be buttoned. He loved to do that, hanging it all back up in the right spot perfectly, and it became a customized job for him. And people who did that were able to do more sales, and he got that job a couple of days a week. And that's because they listened, they watched, they saw the things he liked to do, and looked for ways to make that happen. And we talked about the circle, but being a support group, and the circle was my circle. I put that in today, but a support group of people who are there, dedicated to trying to figure out and help a person to envision what it is that they want to do in their life, or if they're not able to express preferences, the things that they seem to enjoy, to make sure that these things appear in their plans and in their life on a daily basis. It's also, and this is a big task, it's also about building a network of acceptance. And a network of acceptance really partially is a network of acceptance within our field, for people to really begin to believe in this stuff, that this is something that people can and should and really want to do. It's not just because CMS says, hey, you should have all these people having person-centered planning. It's because it's the right thing to do. It's because, it's not because CMS says we should have people living in integrated settings. It's because people want to, and people live better lives when they're living out and about with their community, getting to know people. People have a safer lives when they have people without disabilities, without being part of our system, looking after them, knowing them, caring about them, enriching their lives. And so building a network of acceptance is getting people out in the community, people seeing people in jobs, in the community doing all kinds of activities. The more and more that happens, the more and more it becomes a normal part. And I think it really is, for many people in our society, a very normal thing to see people out and about doing things in the community with disabilities. It's also a very common thing to see people in very large groups doing that, and that many of us believe, and I think the settings rule will emphasize that that's not the way that you help people get connected in their community. And then changes to services to be more responsible to the interests of people, and obviously the development of self-correction, individualized supports, individualized services. Those are the things that over the years we've tried to promote, and those are the expectations that more and more people would be offered those opportunities, and that if people are in settings that they get those opportunities by individualized supports outside of the settings. And again, that's a tall order when you have 12 people living in one place, and even with 6 people living in one place. So we have a lot of work to do in that. So do you have a question?
We have a question.
Great.
I'm gonna unmute David. David, you should be able to talk now. David, I heard I think I heard your phone. All right, well, he also typed the question, and he's asking, when giving choices and options to the participant, where is the line drawn for too many options and choices?
Well, that's a really good question. I mean, I think, first of all, you always want to look to the person to draw some lines. So, sometimes in person-centered planning and the things I've been involved with, some of us with our exuberance, we're the ones that are throwing out a lot of ideas and many, many things, and sometimes we overwhelm people by giving them all of the different choices that they have. So I think first of all, we want to be cautious that we are listening first and finding out what the things that the person wants to do. So now, if what you're meaning by the question, I think it is that what if a person has a list of 25 things that they want to do, and then we have to sit down and have a negotiation. There's a negotiation that has to occur, and what you have to be is just include that person in the process and help them to understand. And people can't understand this. Hey, there's some limitations. There's some resource limitations. You only have so much staff. You only have so much time, and you ask them, what are the things that are most important to you? So here's some things that we might be able to do or some of the things you want to do, we might be able to do over time. You might have to choose some of those things to get started with. You may not, and you have a choice about that. And you also have some limitations in terms of resources and how much staff support you have. And part of your responsibility of being to manage your plan is to make some of those decisions, and then we keep revisiting those decisions in person-centered planning, and over time you should be able to do much of the things that you want to do. But the fact is, in life, we all have limitations on the things that we can do, and we all have to make those choices about how we spend our money and how we spend our time. So I hope that answered that question.
Steve, can I just ask a follow-up question? So you talk about the limited resources, which I think is true, but what if the limited resources are the group home that you described that had 15 people, and they have one van, and they if you have 15 people and one van, the opportunity to do kind of individualized or person-centered activities is truly limited by that.
Well, that's the real point about our existing system. That the existing system, which CMS is now imposing an umbrella of community connection upon. That's really what the Hcbs settings rule about. Is they're placing this expectation on an existing system. Our existing system is just not able because I'm crossing my I'm pounding my heart again with a mea culpa. When I was involved in developing a couple of 12-person houses for people who moved from New York City, and we had 12-person vans. We had 12 people living in those homes. It was very difficult to get people out, and many times people went out with a lot of people, and it really, those are, I'm talking 40 years ago now, 35 years ago, we didn't know what we were doing to a great extent, but we clearly weren't giving people individualized opportunities. And I can tell you just quickly, one of the biggest mistakes I made as an executive director, I had been doing a lot of reading in this vein, 25 or 26 years ago, and I was meeting with a group of managers of some programs and group living situations where people were living, and I was really excited about the possibility of helping people get connected with with the churches and the communities that they might have been connected at one point in their life. We had some people who went to church in the organization I work for, but many people were not going to church. And so I said to the managers and the people that and the service coordinators that we had at the time, hey, how can we get people more connected with their community and with the faith community? And so, next week, the week after that, I encouraged people to do it. And then the next week I got a call from, I was on the Rotary Club, and one of my Rotary friends called me up, and he happened to be the minister of the local Friends Church, the Friends Meeting House, and which had 15 members. And he came, he called me up and he said, Steve, 8 people from one of your group homes showed up at our community friends circle the other day, and while we welcome people, it was really hard for us to figure out how to incorporate 8 people along with our 15 people. And so I knew I had made a big mistake, and I got together with our group the next week, and I said, look, I made a big mistake by not giving you more direction or not having more conversations with you. But what I want you to do is to find out what churches people say they want to be involved in if they have a choice, or if we know their families, see if we can find out what churches people might have been involved with, and let's make sure we're not just putting people in a van and bringing them to a particular church. That's not what I was talking about. My fault for not being more clear. But again, we learn these lessons by many of us learn these lessons by process, and every time I saw that the person from the church, he teased me about that, and he had a right to. So here's a few challenges going forward, and then hopefully we'll open up the questions. But there are still approximately 18,000 people living in group homes with more than 8 people. That's a legacy of the closure of those institutions I talked about. And the reason why I keep mentioning that is people don't understand this. This is part of the problem that New York has. It's a legacy. We closed institutions before other people did. Vermont and New Hampshire, by the way, as an example, they closed their institutions. Each of them had 1 institution in their state in the middle 90s using the waiver. But they had people stay in their institutions all through that period of time, and then they use the waiver. In fact, Vermont has a rule: you can't get self-direction in Vermont. You can only get life sharing, and in New Hampshire, you won't find many people living in more than 1 or 2 persons in places, which is a good thing. But we have a huge legacy, and it's one of the things we've been advocating for in SANYS, and one of the things we advocated for on the transformation panel is that we have a 10-year plan. CMS wants this to happen overnight. We think it should happen, but how will all those people be in smaller places? In a short period of time? It would be very chaotic. It's not going to happen. There's not enough resources, not enough. It's just not enough person-centered planners for all that to happen. Well, there should be enough, but it's not enough resources, not enough dollars. And so we've been suggesting that happen over time, over a 10-year period. But we get the governor to put some bucks into it, put some funds in for individualized supports, put some funds in to help organizations who want to do something different get out of the large places that they're providing supports in. Here's a situation that you might not think about when you think about some of the challenges, but the demographics of the workforce going forward are frightening. And what I mean by that is, and this is something that Charlie Lakin, who is with the University of Minnesota in 2009, started talking about, and many of us have been talking about it since then. But my generation, I'm 66 years old. People my age, 10,000 of us are retiring every single day for the next until 2030. So 10,000 people a day. We are basically many of our, my generation, some aren't as healthy as others, and this is, the baby boomer generation is 4 years younger than me, I think, or 5 or 6 years younger than me. I can't remember exactly. But many of the people are already begin to experiencing some aging issues that are requiring lots of Medicaid. Some people are ending up in nursing home, needing nursing home services, Alzheimer's, and all kinds of issues are cropping up in people in my generation, and that's going to happen more and more in the coming years as we age, and that's happening at the same time, at the exact same time that the demographic of the people who basically the common denominator of people who work in our field now, which is the common profile of a person who does direct support work is at least it was in that time, and I don't think that it's changed in 2009, is a woman between the ages of 38 and 42. Now there's lots of other people outside of that, but the most common age cohort is in that cohort, and that cohort is shrinking at the same time the group of people that are going to be using that need services and also going to depend on Medicaid and Social Security are at the same time. So there's a scary demographic in the workforce, but also in the funding. And there are some state and federal governments currently have limited financial resources. Many of us, and I'll just go back to my peace days, many of us would like to see us spend the money we spend on war, which is more than any country in the world combined, all the countries in the world combined. We'd like to see that money spent on people in our communities, and it would certainly be good to see money spent on people to be supported to live in their communities. And people in this country, we talk about the 1%. I don't want to be particularly political in this presentation, but there's plenty of money in the United States to support every citizen to live the life that they need and a full life in their community, including citizens with disabilities. But there is probably limitations in the federal government money resources at this point, and we have to advocate around that. So, but those are three big challenges coming that are present now and will continue to be present for quite some time. So one question that I thought we might ask, and somebody might have an answer to this, or you might just ponder this question, but what does a person's life look like when they have a true person-centered plan, a circle of friends who supports them over time, and control the resources that they have available? Anybody want to take a suggestion as to what that might be? Anybody want to jump on this in this discussion right now? We have like 20 more minutes left. Any questions we have, or anybody want to answer that question? What could you envision for somebody with a disability over time with a person-centered plan? What would their life look like?
So again, if you use the raise your hand feature, then I'll be able to unmute you, but that only works if your computer has the microphone or if you're on the phone. That will work as well. So Steve, while we're waiting, I thought I'd give you, one of the challenging situations that we've run into.
Sure.
Was or is a young woman who is living in an institutional setting who, quite frankly, doesn't like change, which, you can sympathize with that and understand that. But the issue is that the institution has been slated for a closure. And so the question becomes, how do you do the person-centered planning, or respect that person-centered planning, when really the option to stay in the institutional setting is not available?
Wow, that's such a great question, and we actually saw that in the closure of institutions over the years, and especially in the last 4 or 5 years. I think I guess it just kind of comes down to, my first thought is the people that know that person, that care about that person in her life, family members that she might have, a good service coordinator, or a good friend and relative, or somebody who knows her, who can sit down with her and explain to her what's happening. If she's not able to understand what's happening, to bring her out into the community, show her other places where people are living, let her see some of the other options. For people who can understand some things, what we've been able to do is we were able to explain why closure was important to people with disabilities, why eliminating institutions into the future were important, because children and kids growing up in the communities now, that's not where they're looking to live. It's not a good environment for people. Life is much better when you live in the community. But when it comes down to it, I mean, these are really hard situations, and I think that the best way to support somebody is with people who are close to that person, and to walk with that person during the change. And it's really sad when you see this happen, because what is a joyous experience for a lot of people is not so much a joyous experience for some people. And part of that is because of the institutionalization itself. People, and we've seen this happen, people, if it's the only place you've ever known, and all of a sudden somebody is saying you're not going to be there, you want to hold on to that because it's what you know. And for some people who may not have an understanding of their opportunities, you got to be gentle with those folks. Get them out and support them in any way, and be with them. So, I mean, one of the things I would make sure is that person had a one-on-one person. If they needed a lot of support, I'd make sure they had one person with them all the time who cared about them, throughout that transition, introducing them to people, showing them all of the opportunities, making sure they know where their bed is, where all of their stuff is, the things that they might be concerned about, not having if they move, making sure they see some of their new opportunities. So, and I think that's part of what a person-centered plan is about. And this is then the next thing is that we do true person-centered planning with that person. We get them with anybody that might be in their life that know them, including the staff, and the people who know them the best, to make suggestions about ways that they could best make this transition that they seem to be against. And I can also tell you that many people I've known have done great when they've made that decision. I don't know of anybody who hasn't been able to make a move like that when the institution was closing. But I think that people, generally speaking, when they get the opportunity and they get a chance to live in another place, if people are using person-centered practices, they'll forget that last place they live and embrace their new place. But it's some of this stuff is not easy. A lot of it we learn as we go. I hope I answered that question. But
yeah,
that's a great question.
Yeah, it's not easy, but it definitely is something we run into. The other thing that has been somewhat challenging is that when we start having this conversation about person-centered planning, I think there's a tendency for people to say, oh yeah, we're doing that. But, then you see those situations where the 15 people are going to McDonald's, and if you question that, then the feedback you get is, well, but they all like McDonald's. Look, every one of them's eating it. So
everybody chose to go there.
Yeah. And it could very well be true that every one of those 15 people ate their meal at McDonald's and enjoyed their meal at McDonald's. But how do you kind of get over some of this, I don't know what you would call it, but this resistance to really having that discussion?
Well, I think first of all, I think one of the ways we get over it is by teaching people what the home and community-based settings rule says, so that people understand the obligations that the federal government are placing on organizations and states who are providing and paying for services. There is an expectation that is now in law that people will be of and live in the community, and that they will have opportunities for community interactions. And there are some things that you might debate about whether or not they were inclusive. 15 people in one place in a community is not a debatable issue. So I think that organizations who make that decision, I can guarantee you in the situation that person described to me, that 15 people didn't decide, hey, we all want to go out together to McDonald's.
Mm-hmm.
I think that when we begin to give people true choices, people might, and we were to say to people, hey, who is it that you would like to go out with dinner? Are there individuals in the home or people that someplace else that who you might want to go out with? Who would you like to go out with? And you start beginning to offer people choices, true choices. They're not going to pick the things that we've normally done as a field. field. And again, I'm not really criticizing the person who made that decision. She might have had 2 staff people on that night, and the only way they were going to get out was to take everybody to one place. And I think that's the trap that our system has placed in the, and it is the challenge of a system that is based on large settings. And I think it is also a challenge going forward in terms of the resources to provide individualized supports, and the kinds of things that people who many of us believe have a right to the same life as any other citizen in this country, to be part of their community. And again, the resources, in a wealthy and a nation like ours, we ought to be able to provide those resources in our states. And it's going to take some time. But so I don't want to sound like I was criticizing the person who made the decision to take those people there, and the people who decided to go there. But I really believe when we start giving people choices, they're going to make the choices that most of their choices are going to be the ones that we'd make, any of us would make. So it's a process, and it's hard. And again, we have 1,000 of those 12-person houses. Many of them have one, some of them have 2 vans, and it's a and we have a 96-person house and an 80-person house in Hudson Valley, and there's some 50 and 60 and 70-person houses in our state. There's 550 people living in places with significant amount of people as well, 10 or 12 places. So there's a lot to be done.
All right, so I don't see any questions here. This is your last chance. If you'd like to ask a question, feel free to raise your hand or type the question in. A couple of people have asked, so I'll say it out loud as well. The PowerPoint will be available on the NYAIL website, as well as a recording of this webinar. So if you're interested in viewing it again, or if you just want a copy of the PowerPoint, you can access it there. It'll probably be up by next week, and available for everyone.
So if we have a few minutes, I'd like to ask 2 questions. First of all, I'd like to ask if anybody, doing these webinars are interesting things, and I'm so happy to be asked to do it. The last time I did it with BJ as Self-Advocate, and next time I probably would do it as Self-Advocate, I wanted to use some of the history that I know of in this particular presentation, and when Suzanne asked me, I chose to do that. But I'm really interested in any feedback people have. Webinars are really hard to do because you're not looking at people's faces, so I appreciate questions. But give me feedback. So if there's any way you think I could do a better job with this, I'd like to hear that. The second thing I'd like to ask, if anybody has anything they could share with me and with SANYS. We were involved in doing the We Have Choices project prior to you guys taking it on to NYAIL. We had lots of experiences, some which were very positive, some which were very challenging. So I'm wondering a couple of questions: what kind of support you're getting from OPWDD? I assume it's lots because there's a lot of motivation. What kind of resistance you're getting from providers? What kind of resistance you're getting from family members? And how the kinds of strategies you're using. You're not going to answer all these questions now, but what kind of strategies you're using to teach people about the choices that they have. And I so appreciate the work that you're doing. It's really, really important work. If we're going to change this system, it's going to be one person at a time, and if we're going to change this system, it's going to be through conversations that we have. So even when you get the door slammed in your face, which we did a few times, even when you get people saying things like, well, that's not for the people that we serve, or that's not the people that live in this place, keep going forward with it, and resist those things and push back as best you can, and know that the stuff that you're doing when you're talking with people about this is really critical to them and to the kind of change that we need to make happen in New York. So thanks a lot for the opportunity to speak to you today. I really appreciate it.
All right, and just so everyone knows, Steve's email is sholmes, Holmes, just like his name, at SANYS.org, SANYS.org. So if anyone wants to shoot Steve a quick email and let him know the answers to his questions, that would be great. Thank you, everybody, for attending, and I'm sure we'll be having more webinars soon. Thank you very much, Steve.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Take care, everybody. Bye.
you have to say?